Greetings and welcome to the second annual Maryland State Bar Association and Maryland Access to Justice Commission Lobby Day. For over 30 years, the MSBA has played a pivotal role in Annapolis by providing guidance and testimony to help shape public policy initiatives that come before the Maryland General Assembly. We have provided broad public policy opinions expressed by the MSBA Board of Governors and detailed statutory guidance provided by our various substantive law sections. Numerous standing committees of the legislature have come to rely upon the expertise of the MSBA when crafting measures affecting the lives of Marylanders. We have worked hard to advocate for the entire profession to protect your interest, from defeating proposed taxation of legal services to providing ongoing COVID-19 support. We've been recognized nationally by the American Association of Executives from over 10,000 associations for our efforts last year to defeat taxation of legal services. More recently, the MSBA has sought to heighten the awareness and role and importance of the Maryland Access to Justice Commission, along with Attorney General Brian Frosh, in crafting legislation assisting Maryland's vulnerable populations and also facilitating much-needed funding for the delivery of legal services to these populations. The Maryland State Bar Association is the voice of Maryland's legal profession. We promote access to justice, greater legal education opportunities, and greater diversity and inclusion within the legal profession. While the past year and recent events have been unbelievably challenging and sad, we have been inspired by how all segments of our legal profession have worked together to confront these challenges and to minimize and mitigate the impact on our courts, the practices of our members, and well-being of the public at large. We congratulate Governor Hogan, Senate President Ferguson, and House Speaker Jones, and all of the committee chairs for their incredible leadership and vision, and wish them much success as everyone assembles to get the work done for the people of Maryland. On behalf of the entire MSBA, the Access to Justice Commission, and especially our legislative members participating today, I welcome you to the second annual MSBA A2J Lobby Day.
Good morning, President Skirty and esteemed members of the Maryland State Bar Association. As chair of the Maryland Access to Justice Commission, I want to welcome you to the second annual Lobby Day. We are proud to work hand in hand with the MSBA to let the voice of the legal profession be heard in Annapolis. As we all know, 2020 was a wrenchingly difficult year, especially for the most vulnerable among us. Marylanders had to contend with sickness and death, with skyrocketing unemployment, with not having money for food, utilities, or rent, with being isolated in nursing facilities and in lockdowns with their abusers. As the Access to Justice Commission saw the COVID-19 pandemic unfold, and we started to see the health and economic consequences manifest, we knew that Marylanders would need to use the civil justice system more than ever to solve many of the disputes arising or exacerbated by COVID-19. And we knew that to respond to the scale and magnitude of the need, we needed to do what we already did: convene, coordinate, communicate, provide thought leadership, but do it on a scale proportional to what the moment demanded of us. We were proud to be chosen to co-lead the Maryland Attorney General's COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force. We thank President Skirty for his active involvement in the task force and the many others from the MSBA who took leadership roles and provided critical insight. Our work simply could not have been possible without the support of the MSBA. We know MSBA members make it possible for us to advance access to justice in Maryland, and we are grateful to you for your engagement and support. The task force delivered its final report in early January with almost 60 substantive recommendations to improve the civil justice system. It is meaningful that the MSBA and the Access to Justice Commission are coming together to put our support behind some of the report's key recommendations, including increased funding for civil legal aid and promoting a right to counsel in eviction proceedings. During the course of the task force work, we showed how collective advocacy can be potent. We were successful in advocating critical one-time funding in the amount of $11.7 million to shore up civil legal aid funding during a time of deep crisis. So what we will do today is important. Advocacy matters. Your voice matters. We want lawmakers and leaders to understand the gravity of the civil justice crisis before us. We want them to understand how supporting access to justice helps advance other priorities they may have, like making sure no one goes without food, shelter, or healthcare services. Your voice today matters. Legislators in Maryland need to understand that we must expend more public funds to ensure the promise of equal justice under law for all Marylanders. The Access to Justice Commission exists to ensure the promise of justice for all that we have recited countless times at the end of the Pledge of Allegiance becomes a reality for all Marylanders, not just the few who can afford it. These recommendations, if implemented, will help us move toward that end. It will help Marylanders emerge from this pandemic with dignity, ensure personal and public health, allow equitable economic recovery, and stop us from reinforcing harms to our Black and Brown communities, which have already been the most impacted by COVID-19. We thank the MSBA for this partnership and for hosting this wonderful event. And we are thankful to all of you for coming out early this morning to do this important work. Best of luck.
Good morning, everyone. Hearty welcome to you all to the second annual MSBA Lobby Day. I'm Reena Shah, Executive Director of the Maryland Access to Justice Commission, and also the Vice Chair of the Maryland Attorney General's COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force. The task force was led by Attorney General Brian Frosh, and Judge Andre Davis of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals served alongside me as the Vice Chair. I want to thank President Skirty of the MSBA and Ward Coe of the Access to Justice Commission for their active participation and service on the task force. Much of the legislation we are advocating for today are recommendations that came out of the work of the task force. So I want to spend a couple of minutes familiarizing you with the task force. As I mentioned, the task force was a partnership between the Maryland Attorney General and the Maryland Access to Justice Commission, which is supported by the MSBA. The task force structure, composed of a Congressional Advisory Committee, was composed of both U.S. senators and most of our U.S. representatives. We also had 43 task force members from all segments of the legal profession and different industries, including banking, real estate, philanthropy. We also had committees and subcommittees. We launched in June and we delivered our final report in January of 2001. The committees were composed of over 230 people from many different unique organizations, over 130 unique organizations. There was a real focus and an intentional focus on diversity and inclusion and in making sure that we had Black and Brown leaders, diverse viewpoints, geographic, gender, and income diversity. We had people who were themselves experiencing problems with the civil justice system that participated in the work of the task force. We had many partners that made the work of the task force happen, including the University of Maryland and University of Baltimore law schools. They paid for 10 students to support the work. The Attorney General's office had 40 attorneys that volunteered. The Access to Justice Commission provided 1 full-time staff, and we had a lot of in-kind support from the MSBA. There were 10 task force committees, including civil legal aid funding, housing security, economic and food security, consumer protection, surviving abuse, neglect and exploitation, and life and health planning. We also had committees that supported the entire structure of the task force, including in data and legal technology, pro bono and reduced fee legal services, and public awareness and community engagement. And overseeing all of that work and coordinating work across the task force was the Policy and Race Equity Committee. We delivered our report in the beginning of January, and the report made clear that while COVID-19 is a health and economic crisis, it is an equally disastrous civil justice crisis. We were able to highlight the many issues in the civil justice system, including the fact that 85% of civil legal cases, if you don't count traffic violations, compose the volume in state courts. And we all know that there's no right to an attorney if you cannot afford one in most civil legal cases in Maryland. So these are some of the pre-pandemic barriers that already existed. 80% of the Marylanders that needed help with the civil legal problem already were not getting it. And a national study showed that 71% of low-income persons faced at least one civil legal problem every year. So when the pandemic hit, we know that 320,000 Maryland households are at risk of eviction by the end of 2021, and we have 1 million more for a total of 2.5 million food insecure people in Maryland. How do these statistics interact with the civil justice system? Well, there are administrative actions that require help and court cases that have to move through our court system. At the same time, the pandemic also made funding for civil legal aid sharply decline. Through the task force work, we were successful in advocating with the governor and the attorney general to get $11.5 million in funding for civil legal aid, which was a great accomplishment to make sure that these organizations could continue to do the good work that they do in providing this legal aid. And priority recommendations of the task force, which, many of which all of which actually that we'll be advocating for today, are recommendations that come from the task force, that ensuring Marylanders are housed, that they are economically secure, that they are healthy and have enough to eat, that they are safe, and that they have meaningful access to the civil justice system. So this is the work that the Access to Justice Commission has been engaged in for the past 7 to 8 months since COVID hit. And we wanted to share this with you, and we want to thank you for coming out today, showing up and advocating with your legislators. It's extremely important because there are so many people who are suffering. And if they have to go through the civil justice system on their own, the suffering will only be compounded. And so what you say today, what you do in advocating with your legislators, with decision makers, really makes a difference. So I thank you so much.
Good morning. I'm Richard Montgomery, MSBA Director of Legislative Relations, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for the second annual MSBA Access to Justice Commission Lobby Day, which unfortunately, thanks to the COVID pandemic, we're going to have to do all virtual this year, but we really enjoyed having everyone last year, and we look forward to this event as well. I joined the MSBA as Legislative Director just before the 2004 session, and I serve as staff liaison and advisor to the MSBA Committee on Laws. Just as a bit of background, the history of MSBA advocacy goes back to the late 1980s with Albert Buzz Winchester, who was my predecessor serving as legislative director. Our process really became a bit more refined during the early 90s, and particularly under the year of MSBA President Judge Barbara Kerr Howe, with the refinement of the MSBA State Legislative Program. The State Legislative Program is our guiding document, which can be found on the MSBA Advocacy page, and it outlines pretty much all of the basic standard positions of the MSBA on most of the issues that affect the practice of law and the administration of justice. The MSBA partners with a number of entities on a regular basis, including the Maryland Judiciary, the Office of the Attorney General, Maryland Legal Services Corporation, Maryland Legal Aid Bureau, Office of the Public Defender, and other advocacy organizations such as the Maryland Association for Justice, Maryland Defense Council, and Maryland States Attorneys Association. The Laws Committee, which I staff, often seeks the advice of MSBA sections and legislative committees. Looking at the 2021 session, among the MSBA's priorities in 2021 are additional funding for the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. The MLSC has been really ravaged by the drop in interest returns on IOLTA accounts and the fact that court filing fees have been severely diminished as a result of necessary court closures. Additionally, the MSBA is going to be supporting legislation that would provide for remote execution of estate planning documents so that vulnerable seniors won't have to make in-person trips to their lawyer to have those documents executed. The MSBA worked with the Estates and Trust section of the Governor's Office of Legal Counsel during the summer to establish an executive order, which unfortunately has now expired. Of course, we'll also be keeping an eye out for other legislative attempts to tax legal services as we did during the 2020 session. In fact, during the 2020 session, we worked with the Maryland Defense Council and Maryland Association for Justice to defeat that legislation, which died in the subcommittee. I'd like to point out a couple of new innovations on the MSBA advocacy page of our website. Many of you are familiar with TrackBill, our legislative tracking and reporting software. Well, this year, TrackBill has given us a couple of new features. The first is practice area pages, which correspond basically to section areas, but they basically break down legislation by section area and practice area so that you can follow legislation that's specific to your practice area. The second is Ignite Advocacy, which is a campaign feature which allows sections to establish grassroots campaigns of bills of extreme interest of the section. In terms of ways to get involved, I would strongly suggest that you get involved with your section council, your section legislative committee, or your local and specialty bar. For further information, please feel free to check with our advocacy page on a regular basis or email me at richard@msba.org.
Hi, I'm Sandy Rosenberg, member of the House of Delegates. Glad to be talking to you, members of the Maryland State Bar Association and the Access to Justice Commission, of which I'm very proud to be a member, as to give you some sense of how to lobby the legislature during this unique, hopefully unique, and we won't be going through this again, 2021 session of the General Assembly. I think far fewer members than was the case when I first was elected in 1982 are lawyers. But certainly over the years, if you're a member here, you're dealing with laws and you learn. But the one thing I tell everybody is a member is dealing with 100+ issues because your committee, everybody sits on a committee, and you're hearing hundreds of bills. And so the time and focus we can give to any one bill is far less than what you're bringing to the process. So you've got to be aware of that and try and be as concise and as focused as you can be when you're talking to a member and trying to persuade the member that this issue, which is of great importance to you, but is of somewhere on the scale of importance to the member, you've got to be succinct and make your point in a way that appreciates that the member's not going to know as much as you are, but you've got to communicate in a way that impacts the member. And one aspect of this process that many of you, I assume, know from Hamilton, the musical, you want to be in the room where it happens. As a member, that was true for Jefferson and Hamilton way back then, but it's still true today. You want to be speaking to, ideally, a member who will be in the room where it happens, whether that is the public session of the committee that's going to hear your bill, or the leadership meeting in the so-called back room meeting of the committee, consistent with the Public Meeting Act of Maryland, because it's not a majority of the committee, but ideally, you want to have a conversation with that member. You can also have a conversation with the legal counsel for the committee. Every committee in Annapolis has, I think these days it's 3 lawyers. And one of those lawyers will be assigned to the bill that you are interested in. And it is perfectly appropriate for you to talk to that lawyer so that he or she is aware of the concerns that you have. Lobbyists are clearly in the ascendancy in Annapolis. In fact, there are, it was a long time ago, and this one example, but it's not an isolated example, that I said to a member, let's go talk to Assistant Attorney General so-and-so, who was in the AG's office, counsel to the General Assembly, to get further insight into this issue. And my colleague had no idea who this Assistant AG was. Now, I'm at the other end of the spectrum because I'm the career leader in requesting advice and counsel letters from the AG. But what I took away from that conversation was this member, and it's not isolated, but hopefully it's not the majority, and I don't think it's the majority. Instead of relying on our professional, nonpartisan staff to get an answer to a question that the member had, this member would go to a lobbyist. And look, most, if not most, I think of the lobbyists are lawyers, not all. But you well understand as lawyers, a lobbyist has a client, and that client's interest is what is most important, legally so, for the lobbyist, not the member's interest. Whereas the staff, our interest and public policy creation, that's what's most important to a member, to a staffer. And so that is a part of the process and clearly appropriate for you to be in touch with that individual. This session will be unique in that there will be, because of COVID, far less personal interaction between members and the public, whether that is lobbyists, full-time lobbyists, whether that is you coming down to exercise your First Amendment rights on one bill. And I'm in the midst, as we tape this, look, I've had my first hearing on a bill, strategic lawsuits against public participation, which are SLAPP suits. You may have read about it with regard to the Clipper Mill litigation. It's a lawsuit that's brought to punish or to threaten somebody with expensive damages and litigation, not expecting that you're going to get the damages, but just burdening the little guy. And it's a bill that's been heard before by the Judiciary Committee. It got out of the committee last year and, passed the House floor, went to the Senate, but then we ran out of time because we adjourned early. So this is my first bill hearing as a witness, where I was speaking to, like I am now, to the screen instead of being in the committee room. The room where it happens in this instance was virtual. So I think I did okay. I knew the subject, but in terms of follow-up, normally I would make sure I saw the committee chair on the floor and have a brief conversation. What did you think about the hearing? Anything further I need to do? Are there members I need to talk to? So on. But that's not going to happen now, at least not for the next 3 weeks, because we're not going to have a floor session where there's a quorum required. I am very unlikely to run into Chairman Clippinger. So I emailed him. Everybody's going to have to adjust to the different environment. But hopefully you'll find that the majority of members are open to adapting to this environment. And when it's, you're not a constituent, most of the time you're not going to be a constituent of the member. But if you contact the member or the member's staff and say, my client has an interest in such and such a bill. This bill is before your committee, and I would like to have a chance to chat with you about it. What is the most agreeable way to do that for you, Mr. or Madam member? And you're going to have to be flexible and so on. But I would think that in the vast majority of cases, the member will say, yes, I can meet with you. Let's do it in this form. But when you have that meeting, bear in mind, you've got a limited amount of time and a limited amount of knowledge that the member has and a limited amount of time and effort the member can put in. So you've got to get to the point sooner rather than later. We're still, unlike the Congress, you can meet with members. Now, the meetings now will be virtual, Zoom, email, whatever the case may be. But the vast majority of members are going to be amenable to meeting with you, to having some kind of interaction. And one other point I would add about staff, unlike the Congress, our staff are professional, nonpartisan staff. Whereas in the Congress, you have you have majority staff and minority staff, both bodies. They're professionals, they're not political hires, but there's majority minority staff. We do not have that. So that I think is a real benefit. I hope this conversation has been helpful. If you have any questions, I'm going to practice what I preach. You can get in touch with me. My office number is 410-841-3297. Oh, also, Richard Montgomery is very valuable for all of you as your lobbyist in Annapolis. Don't hesitate to be in touch with him as to who is the right person for you to be in touch with or what's the best argument for you to make. And I'm also reachable. My personal email is the best way to get a hold of me. Delsandy, DELSANDY at AOL.com. Good luck exercising your First Amendment rights. Pleasure being with you.
In order to have the best Lobby Day experience, please make sure that you click into the Agenda section to access each session. You can do this directly from the Socio app on your mobile phone or tablet, or from the left side of the Socio browser on your computer. The agenda lists all sessions for the day, and once you click into a session, you'll be able to view content. Once a session ends, click back into the agenda to access the next session. We encourage you to use the chat function in each session to ask questions and interact with your fellow attendees, staff, and legislators. If you're using a computer, we highly recommend that you access the website using a Chrome browser for the best experience. Some sessions will open into a separate Zoom meeting, including the next one, so please make sure that you've downloaded Zoom and updated to the current version. After the Zoom meeting is complete, simply click back into the Socio website on your computer or the Socio app on your mobile or tablet to access any remaining sessions. If you can't hear anything in a session, please try the following. If you're in the mobile app, click in the lower right corner of the video screen on the sound button and make sure it's on. Make sure your volume is turned up on your mobile device, tablet, or computer. Unmute your phone by turning on the ringer. And finally, make sure you're not connected to Bluetooth, which may be sending sound out to another area. If your screen is frozen or you're seeing a scrolling balloon, try refreshing your tab or browser to join in the session again. You can explore other areas of the Socio app or website from the main menu throughout the day. We encourage you to click into the Attendees section to view and connect with your peers joining you today, say hello to everyone by posting on the social wall, access FAQs, and more. If you have any trouble logging into the Socio app or website and are prompted, please enter Lobby Day 21. If you have any problems accessing content or have any questions, please reach out to our membership team at 410-685-7878 or email us at membership@msba.org. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us.